My beloved child. Something happened in a crowded room that nobody was prepared for. Not your soulmate's family. Not the friends who had spent months watching them pretend everything was fine. Not the person standing beside them, trying to push the conversation in a direction your soulmate had avoided for far too long. And certainly not your soulmate. Because when your name was spoken that evening, something inside them finally broke. For months, they had been careful. Careful with their face. Careful with their words. Careful not to let anyone notice how quickly their attention changed whenever someone mentioned you. They had learned how to smile at the right moments. They had learned how to shrug when someone asked whether they still thought about you. They had even learned how to say, "It's complicated," in a voice calm enough to make people believe the subject no longer hurt. But that night, calm disappeared. It happened during a family gathering that was supposed to be ordinary. Dinner had already ended. Plates were being cleared. Someone had music playing quietly from another room. A few people were laughing near the kitchen while others remained seated around the table, talking about work, travel, relationships, and everything people discuss when they believe nothing important is about to happen. Your soulmate had barely spoken for several minutes. They were sitting slightly apart from everyone else, holding a glass they had forgotten to drink from. Their phone rested face down beside them. And what nobody knew was that less than 2 hours earlier, your soulmate had received information about you that had changed the entire night. Don't skip this part, because the confession itself was shocking. But what they had learned before walking into that room was the real reason they could no longer stay silent. At first, the conversation had nothing to do with you. Someone was teasing your soulmate about dating again. A relative joked that they needed to finally move on. Someone else mentioned a person their family believed would be perfect for them. Your soulmate gave the same tired smile they had given a dozen times before. They said nothing. Then one person pushed harder. You can't keep waiting around forever. Your soulmate looked down. Another voice joined in. Especially over somebody who clearly moved on. That sentence changed their expression. It was small. Almost invisible. But one friend across the room noticed. Your soulmate's jaw tightened. Their fingers wrapped more firmly around the glass. Still, they remained silent. Then someone said your name. Not gently. Not with curiosity. They used your name as proof that your soulmate should stop caring. And suddenly your soulmate looked up. The room did not fall silent yet. People were still talking. Someone was laughing near the doorway. A chair scraped against the floor. Then the same relative continued. They're not coming back. And maybe that's for the best. Your soulmate placed the glass on the table. Harder than they intended. The sound was sharp enough to interrupt 2 conversations. A few heads turned. Your soulmate took a breath. Someone tried to change the subject. Too late. Because months of restraint had reached its limit. Stop talking about them like that. The room quieted. The relative blinked. I'm just saying. No. Your soulmate's voice was louder now. Not screaming yet. But shaking. You don't know what happened. Someone near the kitchen stopped moving. One of their friends slowly lowered their phone. The relative leaned back. Then tell us. And there it was. The challenge your soulmate had spent months avoiding. Tell us. Tell us why you still look different whenever their name appears on your phone. Tell us why every new person is compared to someone you claim you are over. Tell us why you still remember tiny things about them. Tell us why you become defensive whenever anybody suggests they never cared. Your soulmate stood. Their chair moved backwards suddenly. And for a second, they looked as surprised by their own movement as everyone else. Then their voice rose. I love them. Nobody moved. Your soulmate swallowed. Their eyes were already wet, but they did not look away. I love them. I've tried not to. I've tried to convince myself it was done. I've tried pretending it didn't matter. Their breathing changed. Then came the sentence nobody expected. But I never stopped. Silence. Real silence. The kind where every tiny sound becomes noticeable. The hum of the refrigerator. A car passing outside. Someone setting a fork down very carefully. Your soulmate seemed to realize, all at once, what they had done. They had said it. In front of everyone. The truth they had spent months protecting had escaped in less than 20 seconds. But they did not take it back. And this is where everything changed. Because while most of the room stared at your soulmate in shock, one person did not. A woman sitting near the far end of the table looked nervous. Not surprised. Nervous. Your soulmate noticed. What? She looked away. Your soulmate stepped closer. What do you know? Nobody understood the question. Except her. She hesitated. And that hesitation made the entire room even quieter. Finally she said, I talked to them. Your soulmate froze. The room seemed to disappear from their awareness. Who? She did not need to answer. Your soulmate already knew. You talked to them? She nodded. When? 3 days ago. Your soulmate stared at her. 3 days. For 3 days, someone in that room had carried information about you while your soulmate continued believing the same painful story they had repeated to themselves for months. That you had stopped caring. That you had chosen distance because they no longer mattered. That whatever existed between you had meant more to them than it ever meant to you. Your soulmate's voice became quieter. What did they say? The woman looked around the room. This probably isn't the place. Your soulmate almost laughed from disbelief. Apparently this became the place 5 minutes ago. A few people shifted uncomfortably. She took a breath. Then she explained. You had not contacted her to create drama. You had not asked her to convince your soulmate of anything. The conversation had happened accidentally. Your name came up. Your soulmate's name came up. And somewhere in that conversation, you had admitted something your soulmate had never understood. You did not step away because you stopped caring. You stepped away because staying close without knowing where you stood was hurting you. Your soulmate did not speak. That one fact began rewriting months of memories. All the unanswered messages. The shorter conversations. The emotional distance. The moment your soulmate assumed you had become cold. They had interpreted your silence as indifference. But what if it had been exhaustion? What if you had not stopped caring? What if you had simply reached the point where caring without clarity became too painful? Your soulmate sat down again. Slowly. Their friend continued. They never said they hated you. Your soulmate looked up. What did they say? The woman paused. They said they got tired of guessing whether they mattered to you. That landed harder than the public confession. Because your soulmate remembered immediately. The conversations where you had tried to ask questions without asking them directly. The moments you had gone quiet after your soulmate made a joke instead of answering seriously. The time you asked, "What are we doing?" and your soulmate had responded with something vague. We don't have to label everything. At the time, they thought they were protecting themselves from pressure. Now they heard the sentence differently. They saw your face differently. They remembered how you had nodded and said, "Okay." That "okay" had haunted them for months. They just never understood why. My beloved child, your soulmate had always believed your distance came first. Now they were beginning to see that their avoidance came first. That realization changed the room. The confession was no longer simply about love. It was becoming an admission of responsibility. Your soulmate rubbed both hands across their face. Why didn't you tell me? The woman answered carefully. Because they didn't ask me to. That mattered. You had not sent a messenger. You had not tried to manipulate the situation. You had simply told the truth during a conversation. And the person sitting at the end of the table had respected your privacy. Until now. Until your soulmate stood in front of everyone and finally admitted the very thing they had been too afraid to tell you. But there was still something missing. Why tonight? Why had your soulmate become so emotionally charged before anyone even mentioned your name? Why had that one careless comment pushed them beyond the point of restraint? The answer was sitting face down beside them. Their phone. Your soulmate looked at it. One friend noticed. You should tell them. Your soulmate shook their head slightly. Tell us what? Someone asked. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Then they reached for the phone. Earlier that afternoon, they had received a message from an old mutual friend. It was short. Almost casual. But it had destroyed the illusion that your soulmate had unlimited time. The message said you might be leaving. Not metaphorically. Actually leaving. A possible move. A new opportunity. A different city. Nothing had been finalized. But suddenly your soulmate was forced to imagine something they had avoided imagining for months. You building a life somewhere else. New streets. New routines. New people. A life where their silence could become permanent simply because geography eventually made the decision for them. The mutual friend had added one sentence. If there's something you've been meaning to say, don't assume you'll always have another chance. Your soulmate had read that sentence several times. Then they had driven to the family gathering and pretended everything was normal. That was why they had been quiet. That was why their phone remained face down. That was why the discussion about moving on had felt unbearable. They were sitting in a room full of people telling them to forget you while privately wondering whether they had already waited too long. And when someone dismissed you as someone who had clearly moved on, something inside your soulmate refused to cooperate with the lie anymore. I thought I had time, they said quietly. Nobody interrupted. I kept thinking I would figure out what to say first. That I'd call when I wasn't confused anymore. When I wasn't scared. When I knew exactly what I wanted. They looked at their phone again. And maybe while I was figuring everything out, they were learning how to live without me. That sentence changed several expressions around the table. One relative who had been encouraging your soulmate to move on suddenly looked uncomfortable. Because months earlier, that relative had known your soulmate cared about you. They had seen it. But they had advised your soulmate not to say anything unless they were certain. Don't make yourself vulnerable if you don't know how they feel. At the time, it sounded protective. Now your soulmate understood the cost. Certainty had become an excuse. They had waited for proof before offering honesty. But relationships rarely work that way. Sometimes one person has to speak without knowing exactly what the answer will be. Not to pressure the other person. Not to demand love back. Simply to stop hiding. Your soulmate looked across the room. I made them guess. No one contradicted them. I kept thinking if they really cared, they'd stay. They paused. But why should they have stayed somewhere they never knew they were wanted? That was the moment their confession became something different. Not bigger in volume. Bigger in meaning. Because love without accountability would have been easy. Your soulmate could have blamed timing. Misunderstandings. Fear. Family. You. Instead, they began recognizing their own part. And then another surprise came. A friend who had remained silent almost the entire evening spoke up. There's something else. Your soulmate looked at him. He seemed reluctant. What? He unlocked his phone. I didn't know if I should show you this. The room went still again. Months earlier, during the period when you and your soulmate were still speaking regularly, you had sent this friend a message. Not a romantic confession. Not anything dramatic. You had asked one question. Are they okay? That was it. It had been during a difficult week for your soulmate, when family problems and work stress had overwhelmed them. Your soulmate remembered that week. They had barely replied to you. They assumed you became annoyed and withdrew. But while they were too overwhelmed to communicate, you had quietly checked on them through someone you trusted. Then you had added. Don't tell them I asked. I don't want to make things harder. Your soulmate stared at the old message. Their face changed. They remembered the version of the past they had created. You stopped caring. You became distant. You abandoned them when things became complicated. But this message did not fit that story. Neither did the conversation from 3 days ago. Neither did the way you had once asked for clarity. Slowly, painfully, the picture changed. Maybe neither of you had been cruel. Maybe neither of you had intended to hurt the other. Maybe two people had simply become trapped inside two different interpretations of the same silence. Your soulmate believed you would speak if you cared. You believed they would clarify things if you mattered. Both of you waited. And silence answered for both of you. Your soulmate leaned back in the chair. For the first time that evening, their anger was gone. What remained was regret. Not theatrical regret. Not the kind that makes someone collapse into dramatic promises. A quieter realization. I owe them an apology. Someone said, "You already said you love them." Your soulmate looked over. That's not an apology. Those words mattered. Because saying, "I love you," did not erase the confusion they helped create. A public declaration could not repair every private wound. Your soulmate understood that now. They picked up their phone. For 1 second, everyone expected them to call you immediately. They did not. Instead, they stood and walked toward the hallway. A relative asked, "Where are you going?" "To write something." "What are you going to say?" Your soulmate stopped. Then answered with a maturity nobody in that room had heard from them before. "The truth. Without asking them to fix anything for me." They moved into the quieter part of the house. The room behind them slowly returned to conversation, though nobody was talking about ordinary things anymore. Your soulmate opened the message thread with you. There were months sitting inside that screen. Old jokes. Half-finished conversations. Photos. Plans that never happened. A message from you they had once answered too casually. Another they had left unanswered because they were afraid of where the conversation might lead. Their thumb hovered over the keyboard. They typed, "I need to tell you something." Then deleted it. Too vague. They tried again. "I heard you might be leaving." Deleted. Too much pressure. Again. "I made a mistake." They stared at those words. Better. But incomplete. Finally they began writing slowly. Not a speech. Not the declaration everyone had heard minutes earlier. Something quieter. Something meant only for you. They told you they had realized how often they avoided giving you clarity. They admitted that they had mistaken your distance for rejection without asking what you were actually feeling. They apologized for leaving you in a place where you had to guess. Then they wrote the one sentence that scared them more than screaming their love in front of a room full of people. "I still love you, but I know that doesn't mean you owe me another chance." They stopped. "Read it." Then continued. "If you're willing, I'd like to talk honestly. If you're not, I'll respect that too." Your soulmate stared at the message for a long time. Because this was different. The confession downstairs had been emotional release. This was vulnerability. Downstairs, they had spoken because silence became unbearable. Now they were speaking knowing you might not give them the answer they wanted. That was the real test. Their finger moved toward send. Then another memory stopped them. Something you had said long before things became complicated. You had once told them that what hurt you most was not rejection. It was uncertainty. "If you don't want this," you had said, "I can handle hearing it. I just can't keep guessing." Your soulmate had forgotten the exact wording. But not anymore. And now the final truth became impossible to ignore. You had tried to open the door. They had been too afraid to walk through it. Your distance was not the first ending. It was the consequence of waiting too long for an answer that never came. That was why tonight mattered. Not because your soulmate screamed loudly enough for everyone to hear. Not because the room was shocked. Not because relatives suddenly understood. It mattered because, for the first time, your soulmate stopped treating silence as protection. They pressed send. Then they placed the phone down. No second message. No repeated calls. No demand for an immediate reply. They returned to the room. Someone asked, "What did they say?" Your soulmate shook their head. "They haven't answered." "You're not going to call?" "No." "Why not?" Your soulmate looked toward the doorway, then back at the people who had witnessed everything. "Because I finally told them the truth. Now they get to decide what they want to do with it." And that, my beloved child, was the part nobody expected. The person who had spent months afraid of losing you finally understood that love could not be secured by pressure. They could speak. They could apologize. They could take responsibility. They could tell you what had been hidden. But they could not choose for you. Minutes passed. The gathering slowly began ending. Coats were collected. Glasses were moved to the sink. People hugged goodbye. Your soulmate checked their phone once. Nothing. They put it away. 5 minutes later, it vibrated. Their entire body stiffened. They looked down. Your name was on the screen. The message was not a romantic declaration. It was not a promise. It was not an instant reunion. It was 6 words. "I'm willing to have that conversation." Your soulmate read it twice. Then once more. Their eyes closed. Not because everything had been fixed. It had not. But because after months of guessing, there was finally something real to respond to. A conversation. A chance for honesty. Nothing more had been promised. Nothing more was needed that night. Someone nearby noticed the change in your soulmate's face. "Is that them?" Your soulmate nodded. "What did they say?" A small smile appeared. "They said we can talk." That was all. And somehow, it was enough. Because the biggest revelation of the evening was never simply that your soulmate loved you. It was that you had both spent far too long reacting to assumptions instead of truth. Your soulmate believed your silence meant indifference. You had stepped away because uncertainty was hurting you. They believed waiting protected them from rejection. Waiting nearly cost them the opportunity to speak at all. And when they heard you might soon leave, every excuse suddenly looked smaller than the regret they knew they would carry if they remained silent. That is why they screamed their love in front of everyone. Not because they planned a dramatic confession. Not because they wanted an audience. But because somebody used your name as though you had meant nothing. And for the first time, your soulmate could not let fear answer for them. The room heard the truth before you did. But you received something more important afterward. Not just love. Accountability. Clarity. And a choice. Nobody knows where that conversation will lead. Maybe old wounds will need time. Maybe there will be difficult questions. Maybe both of you will discover that caring deeply does not automatically mean everything can return to what it once was. Or maybe honesty will reveal that something meaningful survived underneath all that silence. But whatever happens next, one thing has changed permanently. The pretending is over. Your soulmate can no longer tell themselves they never loved you. They can no longer blame your distance without acknowledging their own fear. And they can no longer hide behind the idea that there will always be another day to say what matters. That crowded room witnessed a confession. But the real turning point happened later, in the quiet glow of a phone screen, when your soulmate finally stopped trying to control the outcome and simply told you the truth. The silence between you has finally been broken. Now, for the first time in a long time, whatever comes next can begin with something real.